What if the reason you feel stuck isn't because life is hard, but because you quietly believe it's supposed to be? Not out loud, not consciously, but somewhere deep down, you've accepted limits you never questioned. And the scary part? You don't even remember choosing them. You wake up, you scroll, you think about everything you should be doing, and somehow, nothing really changes. Days blur, weeks disappear, and there's this quiet voice in the back of your mind asking, is this really it? Be honest, does that feel familiar? Because here's the truth nobody says directly. You're not stuck because you can't move forward. You're stuck because you've convinced yourself there's a line you can't cross, an invisible line, drawn by fear, reinforced by comfort, and protected by excuses that sound completely reasonable. I'll start when I'm ready. I just need more time. Maybe I'm not built for this. Sounds logical, right? But what if that logic is exactly what's keeping you trapped? And that's when it hits you. Maybe the problem isn't your life. Maybe it's the limits you've accepted as truth. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every time you hesitate, every time you overthink, every time you choose comfort over growth, it's not random. It's a pattern, a system your mind built to protect you. But protect you from what? Failure? Rejection? Embarrassment? Or something deeper? What if it's protecting you from realizing you've been playing small this entire time? Take a second and think about that. Not what you say you want, but what you actually do every day. Do they match? Or are you living inside a version of life that feels safe but incomplete? And this is where most people look away. Because facing that gap, it's uncomfortable. It forces you to admit something most people avoid their whole lives. You're not limited by reality. You're limited by belief. But here's the twist. Those beliefs don't feel like beliefs. They feel like facts. I'm not confident. I don't have discipline. I can't stay consistent. But what if those aren't facts? What if they're just repeated thoughts? Thoughts you've practiced so many times, they've become your identity. And now here's the part nobody tells you. Your mind doesn't care if those thoughts are true. It only cares if they're familiar. So it keeps you there, safe, predictable, unchanged, even if it's making you miserable. Strange, right? The thing that's supposed to protect you is also the thing holding you back. So the question isn't, why am I stuck? The real question is, why do I keep choosing the same version of myself over and over again? And yeah, that one stings a little, because it puts the responsibility back on you. But it also gives you something most people never realize: control. And this is where things start to shift, slowly, quietly, but powerfully. Because once you understand that your limits are learned, you also realize something else. They can be unlearned. Wait till you hear this. The people you look at and think, they're just different. They're not. They just stopped believing the story that you're still holding on to. That's it. No secret talent, no magical confidence, just a different belief system. And that changes everything. Because if beliefs can be changed, then identity can be changed. And if identity can be changed, then your entire life can shift. But here's where resistance kicks in. Your mind will fight this. It'll say, okay, but what if I try and fail? What if I change and it doesn't work? What if I'm just not capable? And that fear? It feels real. But let me ask you something. What if staying the same is the bigger risk? What if 5 years from now, you're in the exact same place, still thinking the same thoughts, still making the same excuses, still wondering why nothing changed? Which one scares you more? Type A if it's failing. Type B if it's staying the same. Don't overthink it, because that answer tells you everything. And this is the moment most people face a choice. Not a loud, dramatic choice, a quiet one. Do you keep living inside the limits you've always believed, or do you start questioning them? Because once you start questioning them, they begin to lose their power. And once they lose their power, you start to see something you've never seen before. Possibility. Not fake motivation, not hype. Real possibility. The kind that feels uncomfortable, but exciting at the same time. Like standing at the edge of something new, not knowing exactly what's next, but knowing you can't go back. And this is where your story actually begins. Not when everything is clear, not when you feel ready, but right here, in the uncertainty, in the doubt, in that quiet realization, maybe, just maybe, there were never any real limits to begin with, just the ones you believed. And this next part, this is where everything changes, and this is where it gets real. Because the moment you start questioning your limits, your mind doesn't celebrate. It resists, hard. It throws doubt at you, old memories, past failures, that one time you tried, and it didn't work. And suddenly it feels like proof. See? This is why you don't push too far. But wait, what if that wasn't proof of your limits, but proof of your old approach? Think about it. You didn't fail because you were incapable. You failed because you were inexperienced. But your mind doesn't separate the two. It turns experience into identity. I failed becomes, I'm not good enough. And that shift? That's where people get stuck for years. Most people won't admit this part. They're not afraid of failing again. They're afraid of confirming what they already believe about themselves. That maybe they're not as capable as they hoped. That maybe this is as far as they go. And that fear? It keeps you playing small. Not because you want to, but because staying small feels safer than being exposed. And that's when it hits you. You've been trying to protect your self-image at the cost of your actual growth. You avoid risks, you delay action, you overthink every move. Not because you're lazy, but because you're protecting a version of yourself that feels safe. But here's the problem. That version of you, it's also the version that feels stuck. So now you're trapped in a loop. You want change, but you're protecting the identity that prevents it. And this next part changes everything. Because the way out isn't more motivation. It's a shift in how you see discomfort. Right now, discomfort feels like a warning, something to avoid, something that says, stop, this isn't for you. But what if that signal is wrong? What if discomfort isn't a stop sign, but a direction? What if the things you avoid are actually pointing you toward growth? Pause for a second. Think about the last thing you avoided. Was it easy? Or was it something that made you feel unsure, exposed, challenged? Because here's the pattern. Everything that could change your life feels uncomfortable at first. Speaking up, starting something new, finishing what you've been delaying, it all comes with resistance. And most people interpret that resistance as a sign to quit. But the people who break limits, they read it differently. They see discomfort as confirmation. Confirmation that they're stepping outside the version of themselves that's been holding them back. And yeah, that doesn't feel good, but it feels real. So instead of asking, why is this so hard? You start asking, what if this is exactly where I'm supposed to be? And that one question, it changes how you move. Now here's the part nobody tells you. You don't need to eliminate fear to move forward. You just need to stop obeying it. Fear doesn't disappear, it evolves. It shows up in new ways as you grow. But your relationship with it? That's what changes. You stop seeing it as an authority and start seeing it as background noise. Still there, but not in control. And this is where things start to shift internally. You take small actions, not perfect ones, not confident ones, just real ones. And each action sends a signal back to your brain. Maybe I'm not as limited as I thought. And slowly, that belief starts to crack. Not all at once, but enough to create space. Space for a new identity to form. Someone who tries, someone who continues, someone who doesn't stop at the first sign of discomfort. And let me ask you something. Is this you right now, or who you want to become? Don't answer quickly, because that gap, that's where your transformation lives. But here's where resistance shows up again. Because change sounds exciting until it becomes consistent. It's easy to feel motivated for a day, maybe even a week, but then life gets in the way. Energy drops, doubt creeps back in, old habits start calling you, and suddenly you're pulled back into the same patterns, and you think, here we go again. But this time is different, because now you're aware. You can see the pattern happening in real time. And awareness? That's power. Because now you have a choice. Not a big dramatic one, a small one. Do you follow the old pattern or interrupt it? That's it. That's the moment that matters. And this next part, this is where your identity actually starts to change. Not from thinking, but from doing something different when it matters most. And this is the moment everything slows down. Not around you, inside you. Because now you see it. That split second, right before you go back to your old pattern. It's subtle, almost invisible. You feel a little resistance, a little hesitation, that quiet urge to delay just this once. And before, you would have followed it automatically. No awareness, no pause, just reaction. But now, you catch it. And that changes everything. Because for the first time, you're not trapped inside the pattern. You're watching it. And that's when it hits you. You've been living on autopilot. Not because you're careless, but because your brain is efficient. It repeats what's familiar. It avoids what's uncertain. And it does it so fast, you mistake it for who you are. But here's the truth. That reaction, it's not your identity. It's just a habit. And habits can be interrupted. But here's where it gets real. Interrupting it feels uncomfortable, almost unnatural, because you're going against something you've practiced for years. So your mind pushes back. Skip it today. Do it later. You deserve a break. And those thoughts? They sound reasonable. That's why they work. But this time, you don't listen. Not because you're suddenly super disciplined, but because you've made a quiet decision. I don't do that anymore. Simple, but powerful. And here's what happens next. You take action anyway. Even if it's small, even if it's imperfect, even if you don't feel ready. And something interesting happens. Nothing breaks. The world doesn't collapse. You don't fail instantly. You don't lose anything. Instead, you gain something. Proof. Proof that you can act even when it's uncomfortable. And that proof? It starts to rewrite something deep inside you. Your identity. Because identity isn't built from what you think. It's built from what you repeatedly do. So every time you interrupt that old pattern, you send a new message to your brain. This is who I am now. Not the person who avoids, not the person who hesitates. The person who moves anyway. And yeah, at first it feels forced, like you're pretending, like it's not really you. But that's normal. Because every new identity feels fake until it becomes familiar. Now here's the shift most people miss. You don't become confident first, then take action.
You take action, and confidence follows. Always. But most people wait. They wait to feel ready, wait to feel motivated, wait to feel certain, and they stay stuck. Because those feelings, they come after movement, not before. And this is where you start to separate from the old version of yourself. You don't wait anymore. You move, even when it's messy, even when it's unclear. Because now you understand something deeper. Clarity comes from action, not thinking. And that realization, it frees you from overthinking, from hesitation, from the need to figure everything out first. Because now, you trust the process, not perfectly, but enough to keep going. And here's where it gets interesting. You start finishing things. Not everything, but more than before. And each time you finish something, you feel it. That small shift, that quiet confidence. Like, maybe I'm actually capable of this. And that feeling? It's addictive. Not in a loud, exciting way, in a calm, grounded way. Like something is finally clicking. And this is the part most people never reach, because they quit too early. They go back to old patterns before the new identity has time to stick. But you don't. Not this time. Because now you've seen what's possible. And once you see it, you can't go back to believing you're limited in the same way. Now let me ask you something. What if the life you want isn't on the other side of talent or luck or perfect timing, but on the other side of repeated, uncomfortable action? What if the only thing standing between you and that life is your willingness to keep going when it stops feeling easy? Think about that. Because your limits were never real, just practiced. And anything practiced can be changed. And this next part, this is where it all comes together. Where you stop seeing yourself as someone trying to improve and start becoming someone who simply does.
And then, something settles. Not excitement, not hype. Something quieter. Control. Not over everything around you, but over yourself. Your choices, your actions, your direction. And that changes how you move through life. Because now, you're not reacting anymore. You're deciding. And there's a difference, a big one. Before, you waited to feel right. Now, you act, even when it feels wrong. Before, you followed comfort. Now, you follow intention. And slowly, that gap between who you are and who you want to be starts to close. Not perfectly, not instantly, but consistently. And that's what matters. Because consistency isn't loud. It doesn't look impressive at first. It's just repetition. Doing what you said you'd do, again and again and again. And yeah, it gets boring. Let's not pretend it doesn't. There are days when nothing feels exciting, days when progress feels invisible, days when you question if it's even worth it. Be honest. Have you ever stopped something, not because it was hard, but because it stopped feeling interesting? Think about it. Because that's where most people fall off. Not at failure, at boredom. But this is where you're different now, because you understand something deeper. You're not chasing excitement anymore. You're building a standard, a baseline, a way of operating that doesn't depend on how you feel. And that's rare. Because most people live emotionally. They act when they feel like it. They stop when they don't. And their results? Unpredictable. But you've stepped out of that cycle. Not completely, but enough to change your trajectory. And here's where it gets real. Because this isn't about becoming perfect. You'll still have off days. You'll still doubt yourself. You'll still feel resistance. That doesn't disappear. But your response to it? That's what's different. You don't collapse anymore. You don't spiral. You notice it and keep moving. And that ability? It compounds, quietly, day by day, until one day you look back and realize something almost unbelievable. You're not the same person anymore. The thoughts are different. The actions are different. Even the way you see challenges is different. And the limits you once believed in, they don't feel real anymore. Not because life got easier, but because you stopped treating your doubts as truth. And that's the shift. That's the entire game. Not eliminating fear, but outgrowing it. Not removing limits, but realizing they were never fixed to begin with. Now here's the question most people avoid. What happens if you go back? What happens if you return to the old version of yourself? The one who overthinks, the one who hesitates, the one who stays comfortable. Where does that path lead? Don't rush the answer, because you already know it. Now flip it. What happens if you keep going like this? If you continue acting despite discomfort, if you keep breaking small limits every day, if you refuse to shrink back into who you used to be? What does that version of your life look like? It's not a fantasy, it's a direction, and you're already moving toward it. That's the part most people don't realize. Change doesn't happen when everything clicks. It happens when you keep going, even when it doesn't. And maybe this is the only thing you need to remember from all of this. You were never actually limited. You were just repeating a story you never questioned. And now, you have. That's it. That's the beginning. So the next time you feel that hesitation, that doubt, that familiar pull to stay where you are, pause and ask yourself, is this a real limit or just an old belief? And then act accordingly. Not perfectly, just honestly. Because that's how this works. Small decisions, repeated daily, until they become who you are. And if this felt a little too real, don't just scroll past it. Sit with it, even for a moment. Because something shifted here. You saw yourself differently. And that matters. So take that with you, and start living like there were never any limits to begin with. Because maybe there weren't.